Hello everyone, I'm the Enforcer and welcome to the breaking news. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe and support us on Patreon, link in the description below. Today we've been able to get breaking news as Estonian special forces have seized a Russian Shadow Fleet tanker attempting to refuel at the port of Ust-Luga to once again sell their Russian oil on the open market and to circumvent the sanctions that have been laid out by the United States of America and other countries since the start of the war in Ukraine. Meanwhile, we've also been able to hear that the Germans are now stating that it appears that a peace in Ukraine will highly not be likely and will be far out of reach, especially for the remainder of this year, as the United States of America takes a last Hail Mary attempt at creating an actual ceasefire, and we've been able to hear that apparently the United States of America may be running out of patience, stating that if they do not reach a peace agreement by the end of this month, they will begin to leverage incredibly crippling sanctions against the Russian Federation in an attempt to drive them to their knees to finally end the war one way or another. As an extension of this, we have been able to hear that Witkoff has arrived in St. Petersburg and is currently meeting with Vladimir Putin directly this time, although we do not believe that there's going to be a large development to come out of this, at least at this moment. Meanwhile, the Russians are continuing their provocations against Western aligned countries, as a Russian spy ship has been spotted inside of Irish coastal waters, apparently conducting some sort of a surveillance mission near to undersea cables that are highly connected to the transatlantic communications links between the United States, Canada, Mexico, and the entirety of Europe. Meanwhile, we've also been able to hear inside of the area of the People's Republic of China that the Chinese have been have been breaching restricted waters today near to the area of Kinmen County, once again another clear provocation against Taiwan, and we've also been able to hear of significant news inside of Ukraine, as we've seen that the Russians have run so low on vehicles, they're now starting to use World War II era and early Stalin era vehicles to be able to move around on the front lines, and not only that, we've been able to see some Swedish coastal patrol vessels in service. The news is incredibly interesting today, to be entirely honest, from most other areas of the world. And moving on into our major news just off the coast of Estonia, we have been able to hear and see that a Russian shadow tanker has been seized. Estonia has seized the Russian shadow tanker, the Koala, in the Baltic Sea for the first time. The vessel was heading to the port of Ust-Luga, sailing near Estonia's territorial waters, and at the time of the seizure, there were 24 third country nationals on board. The captain is a Chinese national, and the rest are likely from Mauritania, according to Post Times. Marine traffic data shows that the Kiwala, crude oil tanker, sails under the flag of Djibouti. He said it, but a Djiboutian official stated the vessel is not registered in their system. Estonia exercises right to detain the ship for inspection. The head of the police and border guard, Veiko Kumusar, confirmed the tanker is under sanctions. We can actually see a short clip here that is from Nexta, showing us the Koala right there actually being seized by the Estonian special forces and being impounded by the Estonian government. We have a feeling that this vessel may end up in a very similar position to that of the Everton, a vessel that was seized by the German government, and not only was it seized, it was actually commandeered by Germany and is now operating as a German-flagged vessel. The Everton was another vessel that was a part of the Russian Shadow Fleet, flagged in another country rather than the Russian Federation. This vessel would operate largely on the behalf of the Russian government, loading up oil and other kinds of fuel sources from ports such as Ust-Luga, and then shipping these out into the open world. This Shadow Fleet has provided the Russian Federation with a primetime opportunity to circumvent sanctions and to be able to make just enough money to be able to continue a little bit of an easing of the ability for the Russian Federation to be able to finance its war effort. With European countries starting to ramp down on the actual amount of shadowed fleet tankers that are actually operational due to the amount of seizures in the Baltic, we are believing that there may be a significant change in Russia's ability to actually be able to try and continue to finance the war. Not only that, but with the sharply dropping prices of crude oil around the world, and also the fact that the Russian Federation is not even able to keep up a high level of refined fuel production, we may see that these voyages become less frequent, and not only that, produce far less money when the voyages are conducted, once again furthering the Russians' financial crisis and financial situation globally. This is coming at the exact same time as we are hearing that the United States is making a last-ditch Hail Mary effort to try and see a peace brought about in the Ukraine war. We have been able to hear that Witkoff himself, along with his delegation, has arrived in St. Petersburg Petersburg today and is currently meeting with Vladimir Putin as of this very moment. We would show the footage, but we believe that it may be copyrighted, so for this reason, we will largely just have to paraphrase with the official reports and statements. The U.S. Special Envoy used the same aircraft for his first trip to Russia to meet with Putin back in early February. Meanwhile, the Kremlin pool reporter says the dictator has a regional visit scheduled today, and the exact location has been announced, so Moscow may not be the place for the potential hearing. We do understand that they actually met in a hotel inside of St. Petersburg, and the meeting already began and concluded as of today, but we do not know the exact results or information that was provided to the U.S. Envoy, at least at that moment. We'll most likely be hearing about that later, but considering that it doesn't appear that the Russian Federation is actually serious at bringing about any kind of a meaningful peace, or at least a ceasefire with no preconditions, it is possibly showing us that the war is going to be going on for much longer, much to the dismay of many who believe that the war could have been ended in a very short amount of time and was largely being continued due to the incompetence of Western officials. This is also something that appears to be a new understanding for the current U.S. administration, that the war is not something that can easily be stopped, but is more so a beast unto itself, and that Western officials really can only try and guide the end result of the conflict rather than guiding the actual fate and existence of the conflict itself, as we are starting to hear that the office of the president is apparently starting to run out of patience. And according to the information that we've been able to get today through Axios, if no ceasefire is reached by the end of the month, the president of the United States could move forward with additional sanctions on Russia, either through executive power or by asking Congress to pass new sanctions legislation. Excuse me. This is a very important thing to understand, that the United States of America is not an all-being omnipotent power in the world. Yes, the United States of America is the largest economic and military power, but even still, a lot of things fall outside of our realm of control, and one of the most important things that falls out of our realm of control is actually what other state actors are able to do in the world. We really do not have a way to curb them, where we can just magically come up and tell them to stop, and then they will magically stop. We largely have to try and sway things or push and pull things to be able to meet our demands or our needs for our own American and European interests. For this reason, the United States of America is starting to realize that they might not be able to stop the war, but they might be able to change the outcome of the war to where it will be in America and the West's favor if it is forced to continue. And the once again drawing up of new sanctions is largely a continuation of that. We have also been able to hear that in the meantime, the Germans are starting to show that they have absolutely no faith that any kind of a peace deal will be reached. We've already been able to hear that the German defense minister, Boris Pistorius, has stated that we must concede that peace in Ukraine appears to be out of reach in the immediate future. But Russia needs to understand Ukraine is able to go on fighting, and we will support it. The German government has been fairly clear, at least within recent months, or largely over the past year, that they believe that a larger confrontation throughout the entirety of Western Europe may happen against the Russian Federation, as the Russian Federation may provoke a major conflict somewhere around the area of the Suwalki Gap, in between Kaliningrad and the northeastern areas of Belarus near to Grodno. We do understand that the German government, much like many others, is going through a process of remilitarization at this point to be able to see their armed forces brought up to a large and competent fighting standard, but it also appears that at the same time, their belief that a peaceful resolution to this conflict may come about as another chance of likelihood is quite low. It appears that the Germans are pretty much putting all of their eggs into one basket over the several years of experience and information that they've been able to receive, that peace is highly unlikely, and there's a much higher option of the war spilling over into the rest of Europe than ever concluding peacefully, even if it remains just inside of Ukraine. This is also coming at the same time as the Russians continue to make provocations in other areas, especially inside of Europe, as we have been able to hear today that a Russian spy ship is inside of the coastal waters of Ireland. We were able to hear that a Russian Navy intelligence gathering ship is being tracked through Irish controlled waters, sorry for the stammering there, and that is refusing to respond from to communications from the Irish Naval Service. This is something that is once again showing us that the Russian Federation is attempting to create diplomatic provocations wherever they may be able to see fit. The Republic of Ireland is a member of the European Union, but not NATO, interestingly enough. Nevertheless, this appears to be a provocation against the European Union and the collective of Europe as a whole, and may be an attempt to try and once again incense the Europeans into a position where the Russians might be able to justify later, due to their incensed anger at the Russian Federation, that it is actually the Europeans who are aggressive and not the Russians, and therefore start to force an even worse form of a confrontation down the line. This is also coming at another interesting time in the United States, as we have been able to hear that while all of this has been going on, largely overarching the Ukraine war, the president of Ukraine is still attempting to move forward with his own goals and needs for the state of Ukraine and the continued conflict. We have actually been able to hear that that Zelensky and the President of the United States are once again talking about a new mineral deal, and the United States and Ukraine have begun serious talks on this largely over the past few days. The new proposal returns to the president's original demand that Ukraine repay the United States for the amount of military aid given to them so far. Ukraine would have to give 50% of its revenues from natural resource development projects to an investment fund controlled by the United States. The United States would demand all profits from the fund until Ukraine is able to return at least the equivalent of U.S. aid received during the war, plus 4% per annum. The new draft doesn't mention any security guarantees either, and it does appear at this point that the deal is once again fairly lopsided and largely beneficial only to the United States and not to Ukraine. It is important for the United States of America to continue to support Ukraine's ambitions to defend its national sovereignty and also return some of its territory that it has, according to its 1991 borders, back under its control, because the state of Ukraine, unlike the Russian Federation, is actually a somewhat friendly Western-aligned country. Although that's starting to wane, the more poorly we treat the Ukrainians, they aren't really going to be an American-aligned country. In the future, they may end up becoming a European-aligned country, with the possible split of the Western sphere currently in the process. Nevertheless, it does appear that the United States is continuing on with pushing for this mineral deal, although it doesn't appear to be beneficial for both sides, like the revision that we heard about a while ago that blew up was. It appears to really only be beneficial to the United States of America. We actually got to hear something interesting, though, about the mineral deal. The mineral deal isn't really the idea of the President of the United States, which is something that had been put out by the President of the United States, that he came up with the idea for the mineral deal. Interestingly enough, according to the prior Secretary of State, which we have a lot of knowledge about because we've been talking about him for years until he was replaced recently by the Secretary of State Marco Rubio. The Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who had been the Secretary of State for a long time before Rubio, and largely was the Secretary of State during most of the Ukraine war, stated that the offer for a mineral deal actually was from Zelensky himself, and he offered the U.S. Ukrainian minerals in exchange for military aid, and this was a part of Zelensky's victory plan. It appears that Zelensky isn't really the one leading the charge on what the terms of the mineral deal are, much like you would have hoped. It appears that the United States is really starting to push its own terms, and we're not entirely sure if the Ukrainians will accept this idea or reject it from the United States, considering that it may not provide any kind of inherent benefit to Ukraine, and Ukraine is repaying the United States for support that it was already supposed to be provided for free. Once again, to remind people here really quickly, for free is not a bad thing. Just to run everyone through the process of why Ukraine got the money with no strings attached, the entirety of the U.S. Congress, both parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, almost unanimously agreed every single time that a spending bill came around for Ukraine to approve the funding. The President of the United States at the time approved that funding, and then the funding was drawn out of military equipment, not raw cash, but military assets that were then sent over to Ukraine, with no expectations of repayment coming anytime in the future for most of the congressional drawdowns that were approved during the past 3 years. The state of Ukraine was never under the understanding that they would have to repay that money, nor are they really in the position, at least now, to repay that money in the middle of a conflict where money is a important thing to have a stock of, so that way you can continue to pay to keep fighting the war. Nor did the United States ever make it appear that Ukraine would have to repay the United States of America for that money then or any time in the future. Doing something akin to forcing the Ukrainians to pay for money that they originally were told that they wouldn't have to pay to use, is akin to something here in the United States that we would call Indian giving for the large part, and it's something that I'm not really that big of a fan of. If the current president of the United States does not like that we pretty much gave away support to Ukraine for free, then that could be changed moving on forward during his administration. But we really can't retroactively go back to money that we gave away practically for free back in the day and then change the deal and pray you don't alter it any further, and then force the Ukrainians to start paying out of their own pockets for money that they never were supposed to be expecting was some form of a loan, or were never told it was some form of a loan until someone else came along and then said it wasn't. That's just largely unfair to the state of Ukraine, and not only that, that's going to be putting undue economic duress onto the Ukrainians, as they'll have to repay about $60 billion of military support that they've been provided over the past 3 years, while they're continuing to have to finance an incredibly expensive and costly conflict, which is already straining the Ukrainian economic apparatus to its absolute limit, much like the Russian Federation. However, we've also been able to hear that while the situation in Eastern Europe is continuing on, we have been able to hear of some interesting developments on the ground. While we've been able to hear of Russian donkeys and mules being used near the front lines due to a lack of vehicles, one thing that we very rarely see, but are starting to see a little bit more commonly, is the use of older vehicles from very early times inside of the Soviet Union's later World War II or post-war history. We've been able to see that in this one clip from a drone, a Gaz-69 Kozlik was used by the Russian Federation on the front lines. These vehicles are wildly old. Their production cycles ended in 1973 and were produced from 1953 to 1973. These vehicles are insanely old, and to really put it into picture how old these are, the same time that the Soviet Union was using these vehicles, the United States of America was using the M151 MUT, or Military Utility Tactical Truck. This is pretty much a ripoff of a Jeep. This is not a Willys Jeep, mind you, and this company that produces the M151 is not Willys. It actually, I believe, was General Motors. And let me make sure really quickly. It appears the manufacturers were, let's see, AM General, Kaiser, and Ford. So I did get that mistaken right there. But beyond that, during that period of time, that's the exact vehicle that we were using, or we were still using Jeeps. This is an incredibly antiquated vehicle, and it is starting to show the absolute depths of depravity that the Russian Federation is having to reach to supply this unending need of vehicles, with a large amount of them being destroyed so early on as soon as they're introduced into the front line in Ukraine. This is also showing us that the Russian Federation does not have a large enough automotive manufacturing ability any longer to be able to supply the needs of the military or the citizenry, both in tandem or one at a time. For this reason, the Russian Federation is pulling out vehicles that would be considered antique or vintage for the large part here in the United States to be able to just try and give some form of a motorized element to the Russian fighting forces inside of Ukraine currently. We've also been able to see that the Ukrainians have continued to use their CB-90 coastal patrol vessels, such as these right here, to great effect throughout most of the war, as the state of Ukraine has seen that coastal patrol vessels have provided a priceless asset to the state of Ukraine in air defense near to the coastal areas of the major port of Odessa. These vessels are, of course, rarely ever seen on film, so I thought I would show them to y'all, considering we got to see a clip of them right there. But moving on from that and on into something else that's even more interesting, speaking of interesting developments going on outside of Europe, which we were about to talk about a little while ago, it appears that the People's Liberation Army is continuing to take more aggressive actions against the Republic of China. Also, many people would call that island Taiwan, or the nation of Taiwan. Technically, it's called the Republic of China. But the People's Republic of China, totally different country, is continuing to conduct aggressive actions against the Republic of China, once again, totally different country, in the area of the Kinmen County Islands. The Kinmen County Islands are actually wildly close to the Chinese mainland, and a lot of people are really shocked to know this, but the Republic of China actually still controls a significant amount of smaller islands, with Kinmen County being the closest one to the mainland. This is Kinmen County, and also the smaller island here, which is called Liu, is also controlled by the Republic of China as well. Both of these ports are technically controlled, as most people would know it, by Taiwan, not by the Communist Chinese. But this island right here, the larger one in the middle of Kinmen, is actually controlled by the Communist Chinese. They are only about a few miles apart from each other. I think at the closest, it's about a mile away or a mile and a half away from the mainland. But nevertheless, the Chinese have conducted aggressive actions against the Taiwanese holdings, or the Republic of China's holdings, at Kinmen Island today, as we've been able to hear that Chinese vessels did breach their waters today, and we were able to see this on film right here. We can see Chinese Coast Guard vessels entering the waters near to Kinmen County and being confronted by the Republic of China's Coast Guard, attempting to force them away from the islands. The Chinese are continuing to conduct aggressive acts farther and farther with each passing week and month against Taiwan, and with the rapidly destabilizing situation in American-Chinese relations due to the trade war that's currently ongoing, aggressive Chinese actions against the Republic of China is expected to become even larger as time continues to go by. That's the end of that clip right there, but still a very interesting glimpse into the kind of aggressive actions that the People's Republic of China takes to once again violate the sovereignty of the nation of the Republic of China and its sovereignty over the islands of Kinmen County, Penghu County, and also the mainland of the island of Taiwan itself. But nevertheless, that is all of the major news that we have today. I have to thank each and every single one of y'all so much once again for watching, and if y'all have enjoyed, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. We would love to have y'all join us here on the Enforcer channel and our little community that we call the Lee Spring Army, or sometimes you'll hear it called the LSA. I also have to thank everyone so much for making it to this end point in the video, and if you did, make sure to put Kinmen in the chat, in the comments section below the video. That is K-I-N, as in like next of kin, and then men. It's one word. It's for the little island of Kinmen County down there near Taiwan. So put Kinmen in the comments section if you made it to this point. And also, if you really do appreciate these videos and you would like to help this channel to continue to be able to work day in and day out on making these kinds of videos and our streams, there is a link in the to our Patreon in the description below. I got to give a massive shout out and a huge thanks to everyone who is over there on Patreon currently and is supporting the channel and helping us to keep this news rolling in and day out, because those folks make it possible for us to have a full-time job doing this, and we owe them a great deal. And if you would like to become one of those people and get a shout out at the end of each and every one of these videos, make sure to click on that link in the description below and go support us on Patreon. We would be greatly appreciative of it. But nevertheless, I thank you all so much once again for watching, and we will see you all in the next one.